Hello everyone, this time we're going to be focusing on animating our game and making it look lively. To do that, we're going to start with one of the objects we created last time, and we're going to work our way up to the player. Let's open up the HUD in its prefab state, and we're also going to open up a new window. We're going to go to Windows, Animation, and it's going to give us this big chunky window here. We can slot it here alongside projects and console. As you can see, it's saying that we need to create an animator and an animator clip. So let's do that. Let's go to our animation. Let's go to create animator controller. We're gonna call it the HUD controller. And then we can go to our HUD. We can create a new component called animator. We're gonna give it the HUD controller we just created. And now when we go into our animation setting, we can create a clip. Let's create a clip. We're gonna place it in the animations folders, and we can call it HUD clip. Let's save it. And now we have access to the timeline. And here you can attach properties by using this button, or you can actually just physically manipulate them in the screen. To make any changes that will be recorded in the timeline, you have to make sure you click the record button. The timeline will turn red, and it's telling you that whatever changes you make will be recorded and played back. For the heart, let's make a simple animation. We're gonna have the heart grow and shrink. So let's begin that. Let's first start by going around, let's say 10 seconds out, and go to our sprite. We'll be manipulating the sprite, that way the box collider isn't affected. And let's make the scale 0.95. Actually, let's do it across all of them. 0.95. As you can see, the heart is at 1. It shrinks. This is called interpolating. That means the game knows its key points. One key point is at time 0, with the scale being 111. The next keyframe is at 10 seconds, with the scales being 0.95. And we want to look back on the animation. Let's go to time 20 seconds and change the scale back to 1 again. Let's turn off the recording and let's play the animation and see what it looks like. That's not bad, but it's maybe a little erratic. It might be stressing out the player if they see a heart beating that fast on the screen. So what we can do is we can highlight this whole section and stretch it out a little bit. That way it shrinks to 0.95 at 30 seconds and goes back to 1 for this second. Let's test it out. That's a bit nicer. You can also adjust things in here. You can see that the scales are broken down. So that's our first animation. Fairly simple, easy to navigate. Let's quickly look back in our project menu and let's look at the actual assets we created. So the controller holds all of the animation clips, and the animation clips has a couple things you can do. One thing it has, it's a loop time. That means that whenever the animation finishes, it's just going to repeat itself. For now, this works, but for other situations, you may want to have the animation execute once and be over. Now, since we did that inside our prefab, every heart will have the same animation locked in them. So let's create a couple of them and play the game and test it out. As you can see, we have the hearts being a bit less static. It brings a bit of life to the game. And now we're going to tackle the other aspects. Let's open up the coin. And we're going to do a very similar thing. Let's go to our animations folder. Let's create another animator. Let's call it coin. Let's go to our coin itself. Let's add an animator. We add the animator on here because it has control over all its children. So even though we will be manipulating the sprite, we want to be able to control it here. Otherwise, if we create an animator here, we wouldn't be able to control the coin itself. So let's attach our coin animator. Let's go to our animation window and let's create another clip. Let's call it coin clip. And this time around, we're not going to change the scale of the coin. We're going to change the image that it's displaying. So let's set on the record. Let's go to 30 seconds and let's change the sprite. Instead of having it be flat, we can have it rotated and then let's go to 1 second and let's turn it back. Now it looks like the coin is rotating. Unlike the heart, the 1 second doesn't seem to be the best choice. So let's shrink it and see what a better timing could be. Let's try 30 seconds. That might be a bit too fast. 45 seconds. That seems reasonable. Let's go back to our game. Our game is starting to look a bit more interactive. Next, let's tackle our end level object. Like before, we will create an animator. Let's go end level. Let's attach it. And let's create a clip. End level clip. Now, unlike the other two, we're not going to scale it or change any of its visuals. What we're going to do is rotate it. Since it's a 3D object, rotating it will be the most visually stimulating thing we can do with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to rotate it 360 degrees around the X and Y, and it should give us a very interesting look to the game. 360, and let's go negative 360 for this one. And let's test it out. That's a bit fast. Let's slow it down a bit. We might have to extend it. You can scroll out to timeline. And let's make it around 4 seconds. That's a pretty cool indicator object to go towards. It definitely brings a bit more attention to it than the heart and coin, and will bring the player wanting to touch it. Let's go back and see what it looks like in the game. So as you can see, there's something strange happening with our cube. The problem is that the cube is clipping in and out of our background image. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring it out to the front. Let's make this a 3D view. Let's look at our cube. Is inside the image. What we're going to do is we're just going to move it out here in front. Let's try it out one more time. And now it looks a lot more interesting. Alright, and we're going to do one more object that we're going to animate before our player. Let's look at the checkpoint. Let's create a animator controller for this guy as well. Let's attach it. And let's create an animation clip. Checkpoint clip. And like with the coin, we're gonna just change the sprite that's on top. So let's click record. Upper. Let's try 30 seconds. And let's choose the other one. Likewise, let's go back. And let's see what it looks like. That's a bit slow. Maybe let's speed it up a little bit. That seems about fast enough. It really is how fast or slow you want the objects to animate. So let's try the game out with all the objects animated, and then we'll tackle our player. The game's already looking much livelier, but our player is still just standing still as we walk around, and we're gonna have to change that. Let's start by creating an animation controller. Let's call it player, and we're gonna attach it to our player. We're gonna start very similarly by creating one clip. So let's create a player idle clip. And for here, we're just gonna adjust the player's sprite to grow and shrink as they're standing still. So let's animate them to grow a little bit and then shrink afterwards. As you can see, the player is pulsating quite fast. We may want to slow that down. Let's do 1 second. Maybe 2 seconds. Oh, we forgot one bit. We want to return the character back to its initial state. So let's go to 4 seconds. Let's make sure we click record. Make sure you have the sprite selected. And let's bring it back to 1 at the end of all of it. So now our character idly stands and breathes. So what we're gonna do is create a second clip you can click on this clip and create a second one, and we can call it player walk clip. And with that, we will have to change the sprites. Let's click record and select the new sprite. Right here I have two sprites for whichever color character you chose. Select the respective ones. So I'm going to have him spread his feet, and I'm going to have him close his feet back up. This way it looks like he's walking. This might be a little too slow. Let's try to speed this up. There you go. Now he's doing a little happy run. But if we click play, the player just does the breathing. He doesn't walk. How do we fix that? Well, to do that, we're going to introduce one more window. We're going to open up Windows, Animation, and Animator. This directly speaks to the animator controller we've been creating. Make sure you click on the player, and that way it's reading what the player animator controller does. You can see several rectangles hanging out here. What these things are states. The animator controller controls different states, and this is called a state machine, meaning that it will change how it behaves depending on the input you put in it. Every animator controller has an entry, any state, and exit. Entry will always point to the clip that you start with. Exit allows you to stop the animation, and any state is not really important at the moment. We're not going to focus on it. This line right here represents the action that when the game starts, the animation clip should play. If we click on heart, coin, and check, you'll see that they all do the same thing. That's why this animation plays when the game starts. This is the initial animation. Going back to the player, we want to connect these two. So to do that, we can right click and we can create a transition. What this means is that at some point we will go from here to here, and we have a path for it now. We're also going to want to go back from walking to being idle. So let's right click on here, make a transition, and lead it back. Now what will dictate it? Right here I have layers and parameters. We're going to go to the parameters menu, and we're going to create a parameter. It's going to be a boolean telling us if something is happening or not, and we're going to call it is walking. And we're going to have to create a script to edit that value. Before we do that though, we have to actually assign that variable to the transitions. So let's click on one of them. And right here you can see a bunch of information about how the transition works. Exit time means that it's going to slowly move from one to the other. We want it to be snappy, so we're going to turn that off. And we're going to make the duration also 0. That means that when the player switches from one to the other, it immediately snaps to the next one. Next, we're going to add the condition. So when player is idle and is transitioning to the walking state, we want to make sure that is walking is true. So by clicking this plus button, you create a condition that references one of the parameters. It always starts as true. And now when our code tells us that the walking is true, we're going to switch animations. One more thing we got to do is go to the return transition. We're also going to turn off the exit time. We're going to set the duration to be 0, and we're going to add the condition and change it to be false. That way when the player stops moving, we go back to being idle. So let's go back to our projects. Let's go to our scripts folder, and let's create one more script. We're going to call it player animation controller. Let's open it up. In here we're going to get one object. It's going to be called the animator. We're going to make this private. Animator. And we're also going to get the rigid body. We're going to connect the components like we've been doing before. And in the update function, we're going to be checking if the velocity going left or right is bigger than 0, In that case, we're going to turn on the variable inside the animator. Otherwise, we're going to turn it off, and the animator controller in the window, as we saw, will take care of the rest. So let's create an if statement. We're going to check if the rigid body velocity.x is not equal to 0. Then we're going to mess with the animator. We're going to go in here. We're going to set bool, and we're going to type in, we're going to have our variable up here so it's not hard code like before, private string const, and we're going to call it is walking. So as you can see here, this requires at least two variables. One is the name, so the name is going to be is walking, and the other is the state that we want to set it to. We're going to set it to be true. This way, if the player has a velocity bigger or less than 0, the player will be animated to walk. And then we can create an else statement. The animator is going to be false, because now the player's velocity is 0 and they are no longer walking. Let's click save. So let's attach the script to our player. Let's test it out. So as you can see, our player jumps around very fun. As long as you're moving left and right, they'll be doing the little run. Everything else is animated. And that concludes this section of the game.